Welcome to The Kicker. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell. Today, I'm really excited to have as my guest Emily Sweeney. If you don't know who Emily Sweeney is, you clearly have not been on the internet very much recently. She is the Boston Globe reporter who went incredibly viral for a video talking about a crazy home invasion on Massachusetts' North Shore. But what went viral about the story was not actually the story, it was Emily herself. She has a cool look, she wears track jackets, and she has a really thick Boston accent. She's also just really smart about engagement and thinking about relationships with readers in new ways. Emily Sweeney, welcome to The Kicker.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I was so excited to have you. Like so much of the nation, I got really captivated by you a month or so ago and have now watched all of your videos. So I guess to set us up, tell us a little bit for people who maybe have live under a rock and have not encountered you yet. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of your video about the Beverly home invasion on March 31st.
Yeah, so I am a reporter at the Globe, and I cover a lot of breaking news. The story was about a robbery that happened at this huge mansion up in Beverly, up on the North Shore. And there's a community called Pride's Crossing, which is very affluent. And this mansion was like 28,000 square feet. Somebody, a masked intruder, came in and, was dragging the caretaker around and left with valuables. And we didn't have a lot of information at the time, but, the Globe often has reporters, talking about the stories they're working on. And we do, vertical videos like a lot of other news outlets. And that's what I did. And so I was, I've done these before. And I don't know if it was like the amount of words that had like ER at the end of it, but apparently my accent came out quite a bit. And, in addition to being like an interesting, kind of crazy news story, a lot of people were commenting about my accent and what I was wearing at the time while giving the news report.
Yeah, so let's step back for 1 second first. Tell me about how much video you had done for the Globe before then, like when it was a part of your work, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so, I've been working with video ever since I could get my hands on, a digital recorder. I was one of the first reporters at the Globe to actually like make videos while I was out reporting stories. And this was like many, many years ago, early on in my career. So I've personally always worked in video. I know how to edit videos, and I always enjoy being on camera and explaining things. The Globe, we have a whole video department that wins like Emmy awards, and we've done a lot of work in video. And there's been a recent push to get more reporters on camera. I've appeared in a bunch, and like I said, if you really do a deep search, I mean, you can find videos of me going back years and years.
Huh.
And but this one, it happened to take off.
Yeah, this was the first time in a long time I could remember a journalist like going viral literally just for doing their job, right? Like it wasn't
Yeah.
a funny blooper.
Right.
It wasn't going viral for the craziness of the story, even though, as you point out, the story was really crazy. It was just like people liked you, which is cool. I mean, it was fun to see like a fellow journalist like attract that kind of attention. When did you realize like something is different with this video than and the reception than the other ones I've done?
It was overnight. The next morning when it had like 900,000 views, I was like, whoa, wait a second. This doesn't match up to all other videos. That was honestly was the first thing. I really thought it would be a one-off too, like it was just like a
Hmm.
crazy thing, like went around. But, I got to give credit to the Globe for giving me the chance, because so many people were commenting like, hey, like let Sweeney read the headlines, and I was commenting back too, like I would love to, because I would. and, credit to the Globe and our social media team and our video team for like, they're like, hey, let's let Sweeney read some headlines the next day. And I did. And that video also like did really, really well. We got like, audience engagement through the roof. And yeah, it's been like that. I mean, obviously the views haven't been like in the millions, but the engagement, we are still seeing a lot of traction. So far
Mm-hmm.
so good.
That's awesome. So I was reading a story you wrote years ago, and you said you actually wanted to be a TV journalist when you were younger, but you didn't see how someone who looked like you would fit into TV news. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with that kind of journalism and why it was so appealing to you.
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed talking face to face, just like well, we're not in person right now, but just talking with people, whether it's out in the street interviewing people or even me explaining things on camera. I don't know. This is something about like having a person just like, and talking with somebody and talking to somebody. I've always, that's always been my favorite. Obviously I'm a writer as well. So I've written and I write, to this day, but that part has always been really special to me, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I jumped into video as soon as I could, even at the Globe, before we even had like video, like the like platforms to put our videos on. I was like shooting video while I was interviewing people. And but I mean, in broadcast journalism, broadcast news, even today, you don't really see many people, who look like me, like even right now, or who talk like me, just like kind of like a regular person, and I'm just happy that, people were, had such positive response, because I would like to do more of it. And I think it's more of the future because, maybe like decades ago, a guy, like a white guy, like behind a desk with like a suit and tie, like, you know what I mean? That was like, okay, trust, authority, like this is somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think that has really switched, to it's kind of like really like almost gone the opposite way. Whereas I think a lot of people, they'd rather see like a regular person be like, hey, I went to this place and this is what I think, or, this is what I heard. I think a lot of younger people are getting their news that way, and I think that's going to continue. So I think we should really like broaden, our horizons as far as like letting people on camera who don't particularly like, fit any like mold. Even in the comments too, like when people are commenting like, oh, who is this? Like, comparing me to Ellen DeGeneres and, Megan Rapinoe, like the soccer player.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, like those are the only two people you can think of that kind of look like
Yeah.
it's a really sad state of affairs. Like this is 2026. And like there's only two other people you can like kind of, you know what I mean? Like
Jeez,
that
yeah.
somewhat look like me and don't even work in the same fields, that,
Right.
that you're making that comparison. And I think that really illustrates the real need for like, people of other, just people who look different, to be on camera.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get
Mm-hmm.
off my soapbox now.
No, I love
All right, I'll
that.
get back on.
I think it's so true. And, news anchors typically, like, if you have an accent, you have to train that accent out of yourself before you become a news anchor, right? Like, this is a big thing. And it is, part of that is like people are moving around for those jobs all the time. But you've been in Boston your whole career. And I
Yep.
saw there were a lot of funny comments, which we will get to on that original video. But there were also a lot of really poignant comments. And one comment I saw on TikTok was somebody saying, I wish more reporters sounded like knowledgeable locals like this person instead of that generic news reporter voice, which I just thought was like cool. And you've talked a little bit about how, you know, you sound like a Bostonian. And so when you go into neighborhoods and are trying to report on things, sometimes people trust you more because you sound like the guy from down the block rather than like, the parachute news anchor coming in their suit and tie.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's really helped me with, talking to people and doing all the reporting that I've done at the Globe whenever they send me out into neighborhoods. I've, I have background, I've lived here. I went to school here. I went to college here at Northeastern. So, you know, um, some of my classmates are like, how do you still have the accent? I'm like, well, a lot of, I saw a lot of my friends like go away to college, you know what I mean? And that's like kind of like when they lost their accent or whatever, but I never went anywhere. So, yeah. And I think it's really helped. And, I heard from a lot of broadcast journalists who messaged me and said that, like how they actually went to school and were told like, you have to get rid of it. Um, and I also have some like high school classmates who are also journalists kind of joking, like, wishing they had their accent back,
Hmm.
but yeah. And I think like accents in general too are kind of fading away, and so I think it's like a little bit of nostalgia as well. I've been, I never really thought about like put this much thought into how I talk in the past few weeks, but I even heard like a news report the other day, saying that, people are in general are talking less, and even that may have an impact on, whether accents are passed down or not. So,
Interesting. Yeah, you
yeah.
you seem to be like sort of like a nerd or at least super knowledgeable about like the particulars of the accent. I saw some comments in which you were like describing the difference between how an R is produced at the end of the word versus in the
Yeah.
middle of the word. And I was like, I've never thought about this. Like are accents something you study?
Yeah, no, I'm no linguist. Look, like, but the past like 4 weeks, I actually started thinking like, what does a Boston accent sound like? And like I never really, sometimes if I heard one that was off, you could, if you're watching a movie and it's like, oh, like that doesn't sound right. It sounds more like New York. But in those different parts of Boston, people have different accents. But we're not gonna, if you can really go down a rabbit hole there, if you drill down. Um, but I think one of the if I was like a Hollywood acting coach, I would say, I think one thing that gets screwed up is like the ERs at the end of words, like power, like magical powers. If it's plural, it becomes IZ.
Okay.
It's not,
Powers.
yeah, powers, flowers. Um, that's one thing that gets, I think, lost sometimes when people are trying to replicate the accent. And yeah, so I've just become a new expert in it because I've given thought to it the past few weeks, so.
Okay, so your accent presumably is Dorchester specific. You grew up in Dorchester.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Dorchester and like I definitely talk like my mother and my brother. My dad also has a Dorchester accent, but it's like almost like more old school. So like I would say like horseback riding, right? My dad would say hoss.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's like because it's super old school, but I didn't really pick that up. And sometimes like Dorchester will be called Dot because like my dad would say Dorchester. So
Ah,
yeah,
okay, yeah. So I read you have a dot rat tattoo and you
I
identify
do.
as a dot rat. So tell me about what a dot rat is.
Dorchester is like the biggest neighborhood in Boston, and some of the areas, very working class, and I think probably the word came about as being like a degrading term, like oh he's from
Hmm.
Dorchester dot rat, but then it became embraced by local folks, and so growing up like you'd be a dot rat. We'd have a Dorchester Day parade. They'd sell like dot rat hats and everything. And so once I became old enough to get a tattoo, I got like in Old English letters all across my back, pretty big too. It says dot rat, and yeah, very proud of that.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about your life growing up in Dorchester, what Dorchester was like, what you were like, sort of where Emily Sweeney came from.
It was a very working class neighborhood, very diverse, and uh, probably the biggest takeaway would be a lot of adults weren't around because they were all
Mm.
working, and a lot of us kids were, we were like latchkey children running in packs. And yeah, it was a great place to grow up. I had a blast. I remember there was one night that I was like, I think we were like watching TV with my mother and my mother's boyfriend at the time, and we hear like a crash, and some guy put his head through our front door window and crawled through and was hiding from the police. And so like, my mom's boyfriend runs down and is like trying to like get him out and stuff. But, stuff like that, like living in the city, just like stuff like that happening. It was like sometimes like when I tell stories, people are like, what? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I think we grew up a little differently, but it's all good. And like and this is kind of a crazy story. Like my dad's a little wild and crazy, but when I was like 13 years old, living in Dorchester, it's Christmas time. I'm like, Dad, like, what's this? Like, it's like wicked heavy box. And I open it up and it's a 22. It's a gun. My mother's like, Jesus Christ, Bob, what are you doing? Are you effing kidding me? I was like, so I always remember that Christmas. But, and my dad taught me how to shoot up in Maine, not Dorchester.
Okay.
And so it was just a very, yeah, I have lots of weird stories, but that's a little taste.
So you went to Boston Latin and you were the first girl to play on the hockey team?
Varsity, yeah. Yeah, so I grew up playing Dorchester youth hockey. There were no girls. There was a girl ahead of me who played Stephanie O'Sullivan. She was amazing. She was a couple of years older than me, and but other than that, like it was just like it was just me and the boys, and just like Stephanie, like we grew up playing on the boys teams, and it was just like totally normal, and in high school there was no, Boston Latin now has a girls hockey team. Most of the high schools like around have girls hockey. Now it's like it's grown so much. It's great to see. But at the time, yeah, so I had to play on the boys hockey team, and but it just seemed normal. It was probably weird starting to play girls hockey because it was like, wow, like what? Oh, it was that was probably a bigger change because I grew up just playing with the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And then went on to Northeastern and played 4 years there for Northeastern.
On the women's team.
On the women's team, yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And were you doing journalism at Northeastern?
Yeah, so I actually, is another kind of funny story. So, I wanted to go to medical school originally.
Hmm.
And so I started out as a pharmacy major at Northeastern because that would fulfill the requirements to get into med school. And when I started playing hockey, though, the labs started interfering with practices. So I had to make a choice.
Hmm.
And obviously, as a teenager, I was like, well, hockey is most important, clearly.
Yeah.
And what's the most important, what's like a major that will fit with hockey? And journalism was like, my second choice. And I always worked in media, like, even as a kid growing up, I would make like newspapers and, draw. And I've always been writing. And so it was definitely a good pick. Like, thank God it was the best thing.
And at that point, as a college student, like, what are you thinking of as what you want your journalism career to be?
Originally I wanted to do broadcast journalism,
Mm-hmm.
like do video, do like, camera work. But again, I just like looked at it realistically, like how I looked and how I wanted to like, I used to dress like a lot more like punk, like, and I was like, there's no way I'm dressing like all corporate, blah, blah, blah. Like, and so I went into print journalism. And another thing that actually, drew me to the Globe is that Northeastern has a co-op program, which is, it's a pretty much an internship. Like half your time there is you're studying or you're doing like your internship. And my co-op at the Globe as a college student really sealed the deal and like made me want to go into journalism because, seeing how the newsroom operated, just seeing how editors like gave out stories, people running out the door to cover something, hearing reporters like interview people, just the constant like, and then like seeing everything come out in the paper the next day, just, the daily miracle that like drew a lot of us to it.
Mm-hmm.
Being in it and in that room with so many different like competing personalities, I was like, it reminded me of like, a little bit maybe of like a hockey locker room, and
Yeah.
And like just like the teamwork involved, it made me want to work for the Globe, and luckily they hired me a few years later.
So that wasn't your very first job out of college?
No, I worked, I did a few short stints at some local papers. After I graduated at the Globe, the Globe editors were like, you have to go to work for smaller papers. You can't
Mm-hmm.
just stay here working at the Globe, because I was taking every co-op shift I could, working at the State House Bureau, City Hall Bureau. I was like, willing to do like manual labor. You know what I mean? Like they're like, you have to go if you
Uh-huh.
want to come back. And eventually I got a job at a paper called the Bedford Minuteman, which is a suburb, like kind of like northwest of Boston. And from there, soon after that, I went to the Brookline tab, and then the Waltham Daily News Tribune. And I was at the Waltham Daily News Tribune like, ah, man, not even like a matter of like, I don't even know if I made it a month there, but the Globe hired me to cover Waltham, like kind of
Oh,
stole
nice.
me from there to cover Waltham for the Globe.
And you've been there ever since. How long now?
Yeah, 20. This will be my 25th year on staff.
Wow.
Yeah,
I feel like in journalism, careers at an individual outlet are generally so short these days that
yeah,
it feels rare to meet someone, especially somebody who's not like already in their 70s, right?
right.
Who's been at one place that much of their career. Like that's super cool to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I gotta say, the Globe has been really good to me. It's been a great place to work, and we've so much has happened too. Like in Spotlight, I got to see like kind of like Spotlight being made, and then it wins an Oscar. Like and everybody in the movie, I'm like, oh my god, those are like that's our colleagues. And the incredible work that we do like all the time. It's been an honor, to work for the Globe and for this long.
And you've covered a lot of breaking news, as you said. You've also developed a real expertise in organized crime in Boston. You've written a couple of books about that.
Hmm.
Um, and your most recent book about the wrestler Dropkick Murphy, which I'm really
Yeah.
excited to read. But tell me about your interest in organized crime as a Boston specific thing to cover.
Yeah, so organized crime, when I was working at the Brookline tab, I'm like a huge history buff. I love doing research, and it was actually in Brookline. Brookline's a very like affluent community that's like right next to Boston. It's and it's very small, and I was struck by how many mobsters lived in Brookline,
Hmm.
honestly. And I was like, I went to my editor. I was like, can we do a story about like Brookline's mob ties? And my editor was like, what? Like, are you kidding me? Because, like, again, it's very affluent. It's known for its school system. But, look at mobsters. They also want, good schools. They want safe neighborhoods to live in.
Yeah.
And so we did a big story. Like, it ended up being like a cover story of like, I took up like the whole cover they gave me about all the ties to organized crime that Brookline had. And also I think that helped me get hired at the Globe, because the Globe editors also saw that story. So from there, I did a similar thing at the Globe when they hired me. I was like, just kind of like a big map of like all the major landmarks and all the different, things that happened in all these places in Boston that were tied to the mob. And then I got offered to do a book. And so it's just kind of snowballed from there. But it's really just like my curiosity, my interest in history, and Brookline. And like,
Hmm.
whenever I see, I don't know, I just never take anything at face value. Even
Hmm.
like, when I saw like all these like, Brookline, I'm like, it's so fancy and nice. And I'm like, something's lurking here, I don't know if it's like paranoia that I have built in, or
Reporter brain.
and yeah, so from there, like I yeah, ended up doing it like another book too about organized
Hmm.
crime. So
Cool. And then tell me about this most recent book about Dropkick Murphy. I did not know that the band was named after a real guy.
yeah, so the Dropkick Murphys, who we all know and love, maybe at least I do, and
Everybody in Boston loves.
yeah, absolutely. And there's always been like kind of lore that like they were named after this. Like if you're like a hardcore fan of the Dropkick Murphys, you've probably heard that they were named after a real guy. Being the researcher and like a history buff that I am, I'm like, who was this guy? And the more I found out about John Murphy, the guy who would become Dropkick Murphy, I just became more and more fascinated and impressed by what he accomplished during his life. So he was a professional wrestler back in the 1930s and 40s. He started like right at the end of the Great Depression, and you know, it was really interesting to like see professional wrestling was kind of like how it is now with like all these like characters with backstories, and he put himself through medical school that way. Like he was working as a professional wrestler, saving up money, went through all 4 years of medical school, graduated. When he was out of medical school, he was doing so well wrestling professionally all across the country that he continued to do that as a pro wrestler. And at the same time, he bought a farm out in Acton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. And he turned the farm into a detox center for alcoholics and people battling addiction, and is kind of the Betty Ford clinic, of its time. And it was also, he also had like a full regulation size, like boxing/wrestling ring at the farm, and all this state of the art fitness equipment. And he opened the doors up to professional athletes who wanted to train there, and also the public, like anybody who wanted to work out or get like personal training sessions. And now, like, this is the 1940s, like, just to see like him putting ads in the local paper, like, come down, get in shape, like exercise, and, with these classes and stuff. I just thought it was so interesting. And, the research took years, and I at first I thought it would be like maybe like an article for the Globe I could do, and then it grew. I thought, okay, maybe a Globe magazine article, and then I was like, hey, you know what, this is a book, and I've, with the constraints that I had, like, obviously writing a nonfiction book, I wasn't there, so God only knows the dialogue that was going on. Like, if you have like 20 guys from all walks of life trying to dry out together.
Jeez,
And
yeah.
just like, yeah, and just the crazy stories that like Dropkick's children told me of stuff that happened there. I think it would be an amazing movie or like television series, So that's still my hope, because I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so
Ben Affleck
interesting,
better be hitting up your line.
right? Do you hear that, Ben? I hope you're
Yeah.
listening to CJR.
Now that you've replaced him as Boston's most famous person.
You know?
um, I love how excited about Boston history you are. You spent so many years researching this book. You got really into the history of organized crime. I think my favorite video of yours is talking about the statue that's now at the Museum of Fine Arts, but it used to just like be hanging out in Jamaica Plain. And so
Yeah,
I guess I should just have you tell that story because I find it really fascinating.
I'm sure, like, growing up, you guys had urban legends, right? Where
Sure.
you lived, like,
Yeah.
of many sorts. So where I grew up, when I started going to Boston Latin, the statue wasn't in Dorchester. It was like in close to like to it's on the border of Jamaica Plain and Brookline, kind of near West Roxbury, and people would talk about this statue of Gloria. Like, it was like this supposedly a statue named after a nurse who was killed, and none of that, from what I can tell, is true. And supposedly, if you drove up to it, you could see her cry blood. So,
Hmm.
as teenagers, we'd all like pile into somebody's station wagon and drive up there, and just like, suddenly it's really dark. There were no street lights up there, from what I remember. And, you're in the city, but you feel like you're not in the city anymore suddenly. And then, like, you're driving down a long driveway, and then suddenly there's this gigantic, bright white statue that's huge, and like, the moonlight's like shining off of it. It's missing like a nose, so it kind of looks like a skull on what she looked more like a
Creepy.
skull or head. And of course, every girl in the car is like screaming, like, ah, like, and then we'd like drive away, or run away. And so the statue of Gloria, like, I think it was around 2011, disappeared. So kids didn't go up there anymore. The jump scare no longer existed. And it was just recently that I found out that the statue was actually bought by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and it turns out the statue's just over 2,000 years old. It's Roman, and it's gigantic. I went to see it for the first time. The last time I had seen it was in the wild outside as a teenager, and I got to see it just recently for the first time in its new home at the museum, and they restored her face so she no longer looks like a skull. Like she has a nose now. It's like back to how she used to look back in the day. But yeah, it was so cool seeing it. And I gotta say, I mean, I remember her being really scary, and I was so curious, is she gonna give spooky vibes or anything like that? And she did not.
Right.
It was a really happy, and she's way bigger than I remember. I was like, whoa, I was blown away. And so my producer, Maria Pemberton at the Globe, caught my reaction on video of seeing it for the very first time since a teenager outside. But anybody who comes up to Boston, please go to the MFA. The official name of the statue is Juno. And it's one of the largest classical marble statues in North America, or if not the largest. Wow. And it's very, very impressive. And now you have the extra backstory that that it used to be a jump scare and the urban legend behind it.
My favorite part of that video is the first 2 seconds, because we see you walking in, and your reaction to seeing it after having these childhood experiences with it is so genuine, and you are clearly just truly blown away by what you are seeing, which is so fun to watch.
I really was. I gotta tell you, I still am how does it seem so much bigger? I was that's what really blew me away, was the size. I was there's no way this is 13 feet. I honestly wanted to take a tape measure, but I couldn't get that close to it. But and I assume the museum knows what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They got the measurements right. But it's it's really, really impressive. It's way bigger than I remembered. It was
Yeah, this is part of why I wanted to talk to you, is your video work, your enthusiasm for whatever you're covering is so infectious. And I feel a lot of journalists kind of lose that over time, in part because you're told you have to be professional and come across a certain way, in part because I think people get jaded, right? It's a long, hard career. So how have you maintained that genuine joy in your work?
Yeah, so for one, I love talking to people and interviewing people and hearing their stories and learning about them. Every single time doing man on the street interviews, there's always you always get a surprise no matter what, that somebody will tell a funny story that you weren't expecting, or it's that I really, really enjoy. And also with the video, I'm always trying to think of just different ways. I'm excited just because of this kind of new opportunity for me, and just I have lots of creative ideas, some of which don't go over well, but I'm trying. For example, I've been trying to have my editors, whenever I do man on the street videos, I've been can I just wear my rollerblades? And so far, I've been told kind of no, but
Wait, you did one on rollerblades, right?
I did. I did a news report while I was taking shots, playing street hockey. And I would like to do that again. And I would like to interview people on rollerblades. I don't know what it is, but I'm it's on my bucket list, If if you got to see a man, you got to do man on the street. Why not? I don't know. Reporter on blades.
I'll subscribe to Emily Sweeney's rollerblade report for sure.
Right? And then God forbid, what's the worst that could happen? I fall. Oh, hey, it's funny. I don't know. It's
sure. So going back to the initial video that sort of transformed everybody's thoughts about you, about vertical video, about all of it, the comments were hilarious. There were comments from a lot of famous people. I saw Ava DuVernay in your Instagram comments.
Yep.
And, the comments were super funny. I mean, my favorite, like, I grew up on the West Coast. I'm married to a New Englander. So I am
Okay.
like,
Yep.
I'm more familiar with the Rhode Island accent than the Boston accent, which
Okay.
I have been taught are different.
They
Um,
are very.
but my favorite comment was the home invader also stole all the R's. Like, that's just good. But I also think, like, when you go, I've never gone as viral as you, but when I've gone less viral than that, there's always this like moment of like, oh shit, like, are they making fun of me? Are they like, do they like me? And accent stuff I feel like can be really fraught because there's like class involved, there's like stereotype involved, all of that. So like, tell me about what your thought process was like figuring out, like, how you felt about going viral in this way.
First off, I was just happy that the video got a lot of views because it, directs people's attention to the globe, the story. Like that's, that's what we're going for when we make the videos. And then as far as like me personally, I'm always like ready to address any like question or concern. And in the past, sometimes people have like made comments about um, my accent, but I mean, so everything was overwhelmingly positive. Like I was just like, am I like living in some type of weird dream world? Like, like I was ready to like encounter. You usually have a share of trolls who are out there, and I have no problem engaging. And yeah, so it was overwhelmingly positive, and I'm still like shocked about that,
Hmm.
and it's just really nice to see. And I also, have reflected probably for the first time ever, like on how I speak. And when I saw a couple like people saying like, "Oh, you're exaggerating the accent," I actually I pulled up a video that I had made like 20 years before just to see,
Oh my god.
and I played it. I was like, oh my God, it sounds exactly the same. And then I even found a thing from like me when I was 8 years old. I was like pretending to host a radio show, and I played it, and my voice sounds like Alvin and the Chipmunks, very high, but still the same.
I talked to a friend. I told a friend that I was interviewing you. This friend has described you as her celebrity crush.
Aw.
And I said, "What do you want to know?" And she said, "I need to know how many track jackets you have." So please tell us about your track jacket
Oh,
collection.
wow. So I have never counted them, number
Okay.
one. So I don't have an answer, unfortunately. That number is growing though, because I have bought some new ones on eBay, and
Nice.
yeah, so that's been my like little treat to myself, because whenever I'd get like, I don't know, like some people like hats or like shoes, or you know what I mean? Like I've always loved track jackets. And so yeah, my collection is definitely growing, but I have been trying to wear a different one in every Globe video. So
That's impressive.
I still have a bunch that I haven't worn yet. So I'll have to
Ooh.
count them though. I'm
All
not
right.
sure.
Okay, you can get back to us.
I will.
And then you've been super engaged in all of the comments. Like, you're going back and forth with people, you're chopping it up. You're When people have said like, we want Emily to do the news every day, you're like, yeah, tell my bosses,
Yeah.
which is fun. And as a journalism story, like, I'm interested in that as a method of like reaching people, right? And coming across as more approachable. So what has it been like to, I assume, spend quite a bit of your time sort of going back and forth in those comments?
Yeah. So, that's like one thing I want to respond to everybody, which sometimes it's become like almost impossible. But I've always done that, even on my Globe stories. Like I will comment and write back. Like I, the first thing I read a lot of news stories. I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, like all the major like papers. I I read all the comments all the time. I've
Wow.
done that for forever, and I just yeah, and I've always wanted to like even chime in on those newspapers, but I'm like, all right, that might be crossing a line. Like, here's a Globe journalist, like, commenting, and you're not supposed to express opinions, obviously, if you're a journalist. So, I think it's another like turning point, I think, in our industry is that I think in general, if I had to give advice, or this is at least how I see it, is that like more reporters need to get on camera, like especially if they want to, like not they shouldn't be forced to, uh, but like if you're into it, you should absolutely. And I think engaging with commenters, both good and bad, I've had a really positive experiences like engaging with some of the people who are being trolls, not to mince words, but if it doesn't bother you too much, you should, for journalists to just engage with everybody if possible. When people say like the Globe sucks, I'm always like, why? Like, and then sometimes I get responses, sometimes I don't, and often it sometimes quiets those people down. Like even just everybody getting news, like especially younger people from TikTok, that the engagement is just so high. And also just like live stream, like Twitch, Kick, like people aren't just like sitting back watching. Mm-hmm. They want to throw in, they want to engage, they want to comment. They want to comment in real time. And I think that's also, I would like to do more of that, but with journalism. Doing more like live streaming and also like answering people's questions and kind of like pulling back the curtain to how we work, because like I feel like the general public doesn't know like the amount of work that a journalist does for any given story, all the fact checking involved, all the phone calls involved. So it's probably for the first time in my career that like I'm like seriously considering just other like forms of media besides like, writing.
It also feels like it's like a way to create sort of a new relationship with readers that isn't as passive as like you produce the work and they consume it. And you seem like really smart and forward thinking about that. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you think about that.
Yeah. So, again, I'm very lucky to be working with our social media team at the Globe, and the video team has been like very open to suggestions. And me, I'm totally open to suggestions. I'm like, I'm down to do almost like whatever. And, we have made a call out to people to like, leave comments about like, what they'd like to see covered, which has been great. People have come up with like some amazing ideas. I've gotten so many messages from people with like story tips and ideas. And one of the best compliments I've been given, during this time, has been just from a lot of people saying that they trust me. And without knowing me personally, but they feel like they're getting to know me, and there's trust there. And I'm not like exactly sure, where that comes from. I think part of it may be my accent. I don't sound like a normal, typical broadcaster, or like, some type of like authority figure. I might also be like the way I dress, like just more of like a typical kid on the street, it's probably like a multitude of factors, but it's been really, really cool to hear people say that. And they're saying that to a Globe reporter, to somebody who works for a legacy media organization. And it's given me like a lot of hope, and I was always excited about journalism. Now I'm like even more excited.
I love that. What a good note to end on. Well, Emily Sweeney, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Megan, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. The Kicker is a production of the Columbia Journalism Review. I'm your host, Megan Greenwell, and our producer is Amanda Darrach. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd love if you liked and subscribed. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.